Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. This is our last hearing of the 114th Congress. As Mr. Conley would so eloquently point out, it is a welcome event. I would also want to thank the staff, both the majority and the minority staff, for just an incredible job that they have done throughout this 114th Congress. Many times we, cruise along like a swan on top of the water, and they are paddling like crazy underneath the surface. So a real shout out to them. But I also wanted to thank my ranking member. Not only is he a man of insight and truly principle, but he has become a dear friend and one in whom I think hopefully we can set an example of having differences but having respect and really a bipartisan effort to address a number of issues. And the DATA Act is one of those issues that honestly was really a push from Mr. Conley originally, and so I just want to thank him for that. I hope it doesn't go unnoticed that in squeezing in this third hearing on the DATA Act, implementation in the 114th Congress, it is really about setting a priority for transparency that this committee and many of you that are here today understand that it's not only a priority now, but it will be a priority in the 115th Congress and hopefully well into the future. Until now, it's been very difficult to get reliable and useful and complete information as it relates to government spending and the American taxpayer dollars. And that's what makes the DATA Act so vitally important, and it holds the promise of, I believe, providing unprecedented insight into federal spending. We're now 5 months away from delivering on that promise. There are some serious signs that some of the agency implementation is lagging behind. But let me just say first and foremost, this committee is very appreciative of all the work that has been done so far and all the work that will be done in the coming months and years. And for Treasury and OMB, as they are leading the implementation efforts, they're responsible for telling the agencies what data to report and how to report it. And all the agencies obviously are responsible for their reporting on that spending data. And so while there remains some critical aspects of the implementation that are off track, I think GAO reported in July of 2016 that OMB and Treasury had not designed or implemented the full controls and documented the processes that related to the review and the agency implementation. They also found that there was some concern with regards to the population of agencies and how they're required to report that spending and data under the DATA Act. In recent months, I guess the agency's IG has reported some concerns on the readiness of the respective agencies to implement. Many of those reports, however, as they look at some of the issues from HUD, Housing and Urban Development's IG, show that they face serious challenges and are at risk of missing the May deadline. I'm very thankful, Ms. Timberlake, that you're here today representing HUD, and certainly Mr. Gribben for SBA and your work. But I think the participation of both of you kind of underscores the progress that we're making, and to have a hearing that is totally focused on what we have not done versus what we have done, I think would be inappropriate. And so hopefully today that we can hear from GAO and some of the experts there in terms of what has been done, what remains to be a challenge, and which agencies are stepping up to do their part. I can tell you that the ranking member and I are both committed to making sure that this particular aspect of the DATA Act really is meaningful. What I don't want is to meet a May deadline, and I think today we'll hear some testimony that would suggest that we're going to perhaps miss that. I think OMB, Mr. Mader, this is your last hearing, as I understand. We thank you for your service to our country and certainly to OMB. I think the pilot program and the delays and what we're hearing there is a concern. Just speaking frankly, and yet at the same time, you and I have had some good conversations about not only moving forward, but how we do that. So I look forward to working with each one of you in the implementation as we go forward. Hopefully today we'll establish some of these last 5-month hurdles that we have before implementation. And knowing that even after May, that we're going to have quite a bit of tweaking that has to be done, and perhaps some more focus on areas that we're not performing as well. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. I look forward to your testimony, and I'll recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me begin by saying I want to express similar sentiments about our collaboration and your friendship. What an unlikely relationship, the Chairman of the Freedom Caucus and this progressive Democrat from Northern Virginia. And we don't pretend we're going to agree on everything. But you know what? Our relationship began with mutual respect, respect for each other's point of view, respect for the fact that we both were presumably motivated to try to leave this place a better place than we found it. And we found common ground where we could. And this subcommittee in the last 2 years reflects that spirit. And would that all such committees and subcommittees could operate that way. And we don't gloss over differences, but neither do we overreact to them. And I really appreciate your friendship, Mark, and your leadership of the subcommittee. And hopefully in the next Congress, that collaboration and friendship will even deepen, and we'll be more select in the number of hearings we have. But I thank you and wish everybody a happy holiday. There's bipartisan agreement that if implemented properly, the DATA Act can improve transparency and accountability in government spending. Under the DATA Act, agencies are required to report spending using a common set of data standards, and that information must be made publicly available for free access and download. The public benefits are potentially quite substantial. Currently, each agency reports spending data differently, using different systems and reporting requirements across the Federal Government. Implementation of the DATA Act will provide universal access and harmonious standards for Federal spending information as one consolidated electronic data set. This will enable data to be compared across agencies and to help expose duplication and waste in Federal spending. The DATA Act holds great potential for saving taxpayers' money. Additionally, just last week, this committee heard about how the DATA Act can be used to restore the power of the purse here in the United States Congress. Unfortunately, Congress has failed to provide the funding necessary for agencies to fully implement the Act. The CBO estimated that the DATA Act would cost about $300 million from fiscal year 2014 through fiscal year 2018. Since the passage of the Act in 2014, Congress, no surprise, has appropriated 1/10 of that amount, $30.7 million, to 4 agencies for implementation in fiscal year 2016. GAO has noted that the lack of resources is a risk to timely implementation. Despite these funding challenges, the government has made some progress, real progress, on implementation since the Act's passage, and additional progress since our last hearing on this issue in April. In response to a GAO recommendation, OMB and Treasury established a Data Standards Committee in April, which will be responsible for developing and maintaining data standards. While progress has been made, implementation challenges remain that pose a risk to timely implementation. The new version of the DATA Act schema was released 4 months later than planned, and just 1 year before reporting is required to begin under the Act. Agencies will rely on the schema for reporting guidance, and its delay could pose a risk to timely agency reporting. I know we want to hear more about that this morning, Mr. Chairman. I have concerns about further delay in OMB's contracting portion of Section 5 pilot, which you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. Section 5 of the Act requires OMB to run pilot programs to reduce reporting burdens for recipients of Federal grants and contracts. While GAO has found that OMB has made progress in ensuring that the design of the pilots meets statutory requirements and leading practices, the committee recently learned that the contracting portion of the pilot will be delayed until early 2017. This is particularly troubling given the effects it will have on the Federal contracting industry. I want to understand the reasons for the delay and how OMB intends to mitigate the risk this delay poses to timely implementation. Elections have consequences, but the new administration must not impair full implementation of this Act. It is critical that the next administration make implementation of the Data Act a priority, and that Congress follow through with bipartisan commitment for its oversight and full funding. Mr. Chairman, I will be a partner with you in conducting that oversight and advocating for the necessary funding in the next Congress. When Congress enacted the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, the process for investing in information technology potentially became a lot more efficient. I think the Data Act shows similar potential and will complement FITARA and help agencies make smarter investments. These pieces of legislation should enhance the procurement process across the board. The Data Act and similar government transparency efforts have tremendous potential and will be more important than ever, I believe, over the next 4 years. Congress will need to fully fund it, remain focused on the mission, and continue to hold hearings like this one to ensure successful implementation. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his kind words, and I will reaffirm my commitment to him with regards to the funding aspect. As a fiscal conservative, it is vitally important that we get the proper funding to make sure that we implement that. So you have my reaffirmation of that commitment. I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. I would, before we recognize our panel of witnesses, wanted to recognize one other group, the Data Coalition group, that actually helped me understand this whole issue a lot better. And as I was going along, assuming that everything was going along with the speed of light, they were the ones that helped me understand the potential for the delayed implementation, so I wanted to recognize them. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Paula Rascona, Director of the Financial Management and Assurance area at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, and along with Ms. Rascona is Peter Del Toro, the Assistant Director in Strategic Issues at USGAO. His expertise on this issue will be important for the subject matter of this hearing, and he will as well be sworn in. The Honorable David Mader, Controller at the Office of Federal Financial Management at the Office of OMB. Welcome. Mr. David Liebrick, Fiscal Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Welcome. Ms. Courtney Timberlake, Deputy Chief Financial Officer at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Welcome. And Mr. Timothy Gribben, Chief Financial Officer and Associate Administrator for Performance Management at the U.S. Small Business Administration. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, we'll have all witnesses sworn in before they testify, so if you'd please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please take your seat and let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, I would ask that you would limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Most of you are familiar with that, but your entire written statement will be made part of the record. So we will now recognize you, Ms. Rascona, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee, I am pleased to be here today to discuss our oversight of the implementation of the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act of 2014 and steps that the Office of Management and Budget, Department of Treasury, and federal agencies have taken. This hearing comes at an important time with the approaching deadline of May 2017 and the administration transition. Today, we are releasing another report in a series of interim reports to Congress in response to our mandate. Our report examined the data governance structure and transition, implementation challenges reported by major agencies, government-wide standards and technical specifications for reporting, and updated designs to the Section 5 pilot. My written statement highlights some of the key progress, findings, and the new recommendation from our report issued today. In brief, Mr. Chairman, OMB and Treasury have taken steps to further establish a data governance structure, issued additional guidance, and improved the design of the Section 5 pilot. But more work is needed for timely and effective implementation of the Data Act. In addition, agencies continue to face implementation challenges and are taking steps to mitigate those challenges. First, regarding data governance and the transition to a new administration, OMB and Treasury have created a new Data Standards Committee to maintain and clarify existing standards and establish new data elements. Although this represents progress, more remains to be done, such as developing a clear set of policies and procedures to help ensure the integrity of data standards over time. The transition to a new administration presents potential risks to the Data Act implementation efforts of shifting priorities or a loss of momentum. This further highlights the need for a robust data governance structure to provide consistent data management during a time of change and transition. Second, agencies continue to report challenges in their implementation plan updates. We identified 4 overarching categories of challenges in the August 2016 CFO Act agencies implementation plan updates, including systems integration issues, a lack of resources, evolving and complex reporting requirements, and timely and consistent guidance. Agencies reported making changes to internal policies and procedures, leveraging existing resources, and employing manual and temporary system integration workarounds to help mitigate these challenges. The updated plans indicated that some agencies are at risk of not meeting the May 2017 reporting deadline because of these challenges. In addition, some agency inspector general readiness review reports indicate that their agencies are at risk of also not meeting the reporting deadline. The third area in our report is on data standards and technical specifications for reporting. OMB has made some progress with these efforts and issued additional guidance in the November 2016 on reporting financial information for specific transactions and senior accountability official quality assurances. However, a lack of clarity with certain definitions remains. Agencies have made progress in creating and testing their data files using Treasury's data validation system, but additional work remains before the May 2017 deadline. Some agencies reported in their plan updates efforts to develop interim solutions by constructing these files manually until software fixes are completed. This can be burdensome and increase the risk for errors. The last area covered in our report is the pilot to reduce recipient reporting burden. The revised designs of the grants and procurement portions of the Section 5 pilot program now meet Data Act statutory requirements and partially meet each of the leading practices for effective pilot design. This represents significant progress since April 2016. However, the design of the procurement portion of the pilot does not clearly document how findings from reporting certified payroll will relate more broadly to the diverse range of other federal procurement reporting requirements. In our report released today, we made a new recommendation to OMB intended to help ensure that the design of the procurement portion of the pilot better reflects leading practices by more clearly documenting this linkage. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared remarks. I would be happy to answer any questions that you or the other subcommittee members have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mader, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the progress that we are making towards the implementation of the DATA Act. We have made significant progress since we last discussed this issue with the subcommittee in April. Since April of 2016, OMB has provided additional policy guidance to federal agencies on the DATA Act implementation. We've delivered on our commitment to monitor agency progress, and we've implemented a governance structure over the data standards. First, on May 3rd, we issued guidance which included requirements for federal agencies to submit data from designated authoritative sources for display on a future USA Spending Gov website. Second, we issued guidance on November 4th regarding reporting intergovernmental transfers, reporting awards, and assurances from our senior accountable officials regarding the validity of the data that will be submitted to the new website. Third, we've implemented continued monitoring of progress towards the implementation. As you recall, back in April when Dave and I were here, we said that we were beginning to meet with each of the 24 CFO Act agencies to discuss their detailed implementation plans. I'm pleased to report that Dave and I and our teams completed those in-person visits with all of those 24 agencies, and we've received written updates this past summer from each of the 24 agencies with regard to their implementation plans between now and May of 2017. When we looked at the updated plans this summer, we identified 9 agencies where Dave and I conducted subsequent in-person reviews to better understand some of the challenges that they were facing between now and May of 2014. Fourth, we developed recommendations to modify the existing financial assistance provision in our Uniform Grants Guidance, which will support the alignment of the final data standards with the DATA Act. And fifth, we implemented a governance structure for USA Spending regarding the data center. And as I think we've all discussed over the last year, that it's important for us to, and we've adopted the recommendations from GAO with regard to building out this governance structure. So this is a governance structure that will exist for years to come as we develop standards and as we refine the standards going forward. Lastly, we've made continued progress in the Section 5 pilot to reduce the unnecessary reporting burden for Federal grant and contract recipients. The HHS pilot for grants is well underway, and we fully expect that the final report on that study will be issued in 2017 in August. As we have discussed and as my colleague from GAO has testified, we've made the adjustments to the procurement pilot. Unfortunately, when we began developing the tool that was going to actually host the ingestion of this data, we identified some concerns around the robustness of the cybersecurity aspect of that system, and we've had to actually restart that process. And as GAO has mentioned, we don't anticipate starting the actual data collection now until either late January or early February. But as we discussed at our April hearing, we are going to issue a report, even if it's interim, in August of 2017, and we will continue to collect, as we committed in the April hearing, to collect a full year's worth of data and then modify the report accordingly once we receive all of the data. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to our conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Liebrick. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Connolly, thank you for inviting me here to talk about Treasury's efforts to implement the DATA Act. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for your continued interest and oversight in this issue. When we've been implementing this pretty complex and robust legislation, your interest in these hearings have been very useful to us as we've been going back to the agencies and talking to external stakeholders about the importance of the effort and indeed to make sure that we're making meaningful progress toward implementation in the May 2017 deadline. I think this is the fourth and perhaps final time that Dave Mader and I will testify before Congress. And I also want to express a personal thank you to Dave. One of the real pleasures in this process has been working with Dave. His leadership and his commitment from OMB have been critical to our success, and I want to thank him publicly for that. When I testified before the committee in April, we provided an update on our use of the Agile approach in terms of implementation. And so today what I'd like to talk a little bit more about is the 3 work streams that we have responsibility for in Treasury. And that is the establishment of the schema, the establishment of a broker, and then ultimately the implementation of a new website to present the data. I'll start with the schema, which is really one of the foundational points of the whole success of the effort. And the schema is really taking, we talked about those 57 elements that need to be reported to the government as a whole. In actuality, around 400 elements that need to be reported. And so what we have done is developed a schema that identifies to the agencies what needs to be reported and how it needs to be reported to Treasury, into the broker. That was a very extensive effort, and one that we sought public comment on and public input, and I think we're in a position now to have finalized the schema, and agencies are using it to compile their files. The second piece that we've had responsibility for is the data broker, and that is when the information comes in, it needs to reside in a certain place, and the broker is the place where we ingest the data from the files from the agencies, have the ability to validate the information, and then ultimately have the agency certify the information as valid before we present it on the website. Here we also used an Agile approach in which we used a number of beta versions and had the agencies come in what we called our sandbox, to test and to make sure that their data was in the right file format and would pass the broker. And that process has been an iterative one. It began about 6 or 8 months ago. I can tell you that in having managed other large-scale efforts, doing something like this in the past in the government has oftentimes taken 3 or 4 years. Our ability to do this in a 6-month process is attributable to the use of the Agile development process and the iterative process and the user-centric process. The final piece I want to report on is the development of the USA Spending website. We know that how the information is presented and its usability is critical. So we've had an open beta.gov site where users can come in and sort of give us their input and their feedback on what that site should look like, how the information should be presented, how they'll potentially use the information. And what we know is that when someone comes to the website to use data, they tend to come for 3 reasons. The first reason is they just want the information that we provide. The second is they might want to use the tools that we have available on the website. And the third kind of user oftentimes just comes in and wants the data, so that they can actually manipulate the data or use the data or do the analysis around the data however they choose. We're designing the new USA website so that users can have an effective and successful experience in all 3 of those areas. I've attended several forums recently where it's very clear that there's a strong worldwide trend for more data. And it's not surprising that there's more interest in transparency and more interest in usability, and as we like to talk about in this project, better data, better decisions, and better government. It's clear to me that what we've been doing with the schema and our approach, the Agile approach, is very applicable not only to what we're doing in this country, but also to state and local governments as well as international governments. The approach we've taken is extensible, so that while we have 400 elements that we're reporting on today, we realize that there are more things we can include going forward, one reason why the Data Standards Committee is so important. And we also realize that this foundational approach, we believe, will have a material impact on other areas across government, whether it be in IT, whether it be in human resources, or performance across government. I'd like to conclude by saying that while Treasury's aspect of the implementation is on track, there is still a significant amount of work that needs to be done to meet the May 2017 milestone. Our team has been working to complete the data infrastructure, support the new website, develop the new and improved USA Spending website, and work with the agencies to facilitate their submissions. And we'll continue to work with them over the coming months. But in my experience over 25 years in federal government, these types of implementations are not simple or even perfect, even when well planned and well managed. The data will not be flawless or fully complete in May, since this is the first time this has been collected and linked in this manner. While much attention has been paid to the May deadline, I think it's important to note that May is just the beginning. We at Treasury are committed to continuously improve the data by working with agencies and the oversight entities to increase spending transparency and meet the goals of the DATA Act. That concludes my opening remarks.
Thank you so much. Ms. Timberlake, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. On behalf of Secretary Julian Castro, I want to thank you, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss HUD's efforts to increase transparency and accountability through implementation of the DATA Act. I was honored to join HUD this past August to serve as the Deputy Chief Financial Officer. I appreciate the subcommittee's focus on implementation of the DATA Act, and I am pleased to report that HUD will substantially meet DATA Act reporting requirements by May of 2017. HUD has made significant progress and is using the implementation of the DATA Act to change business processes, improve data quality, and evaluate future financial and programmatic technology needs. Using the Department of the Treasury and OMB's DATA Act implementation playbook as a foundation, HUD has developed a plan that follows the 8 steps outlined in the playbook. Through proactive planning and management, HUD is on track with completing the milestones. DATA Act implementation is a priority for HUD, and we have dedicated existing resources by aligning DATA Act support with other initiatives. HUD's strategy to implement the DATA Act accounts for varying timelines and requirements across HUD, FHA, and Ginnie Mae. Our strategy is rooted in strong cross-organizational and interagency collaboration, as well as effective risk management throughout multiple stages of implementation. This strategy works to align existing resources, best practices, and schedules to promote HUD's commitment in complying with the DATA Act and remaining compliant beyond the initial May 2017 DATA Act submission. HUD will continue to submit data to usaspending.gov for grants, cooperative agreements, and vouchers. We are able to utilize the expertise and resources of our shared service provider at Treasury to provide financial and award data. During implementation, HUD has identified challenges, but through collaboration with our shared service provider, we continue to resolve these shared issues. The variety of source systems within HUD requires a standardized approach to data validation. When implemented, the DATA Act reporting requirements will strengthen agency data policies and assist in its ongoing data standardization efforts. To fully realize this opportunity, HUD will continue to navigate the complex environment of new and legacy systems. We will leverage the shared service environment and existing IT modernization efforts to overcome these data challenges. One of the primary goals of DATA Act implementation is to provide a complete, understandable picture of federal spending to the public. DATA Act submissions and reporting processes will be audited and reviewed by HUD's Inspector General and GAO in multiple contexts. With that awareness, we will continue to work with our IG and GAO, which includes reviews of our overall IT strategy to ensure compliance with the DATA Act. To help reduce costs, HUD plans to utilize and leverage its relationship with our shared service partners at Treasury to complete submission of data to the data broker. However, HUD will incur additional costs associated with support services, ongoing reviews, audits, and updates as required by the DATA Act. The Act requires agencies to provide standardized data to inform taxpayers, private industries, and federal agencies on government-wide spending initiatives. Under the DATA Act, HUD will have the opportunity to expand data-driven decision-making to further inform its federal spending efforts, enhancing accountability for its programs. HUD is dedicated to performing transparent reporting. We plan to leverage the data extracted from source systems to help management make informed business decisions for our agency, our stakeholders, and the American taxpayer. On behalf of HUD, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. HUD has made significant progress in implementing the requirements of the DATA Act. We look forward to sharing our detailed financial data with the public, realizing the benefits of standardized data, and participating in the conversations our data will spark. I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Timberlake. Mr. Gribben, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
On behalf of Administrator Maria Contreras-Sweet, I want to thank you, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to discuss SBA's efforts to increase transparency and accountability in financial management through implementation of the Data Act. I am pleased to inform the subcommittee that SBA has successfully generated the required Data Act files and passed the broker's validation tests. In fact, SBA has the distinction of being the first CFO Act agency to complete its implementation work 6 months ahead of schedule. SBA initiated the project in September 2014 with an overall timeline to complete the project in compliance with Data Act reporting requirements. SBA's financial systems are current generation, and data quality standards have been in place such that we can reconcile information that we send to government-wide systems like USA Spending and FPDS. SBA also benefits from having financial systems that are supported by qualified functional and technical leads, and we had already completed the work necessary to link award data between our financial systems and our management system, which is the most difficult requirement inherent in Data Act reporting. For some challenges, SBA currently reports financial assistance awards to USA Spending for loan guarantees, for business direct loans, SBIC debentures, grants and cooperative agreements, and contract awards, and we were able to validate the reported data against our internal data systems. Now that the awards file is being provided by the broker and the agency is not able to modify that file, the SBA does not know what challenges may exist in the future with data reconciliation. We are especially concerned about how the reporting cadences between the different awards submissions may affect our ability to reconcile the awards file with the financial file. SBA's programs are executed through a variety of third-party partners, including financial institutions. And while data capture fields have been strengthened through the use of validation edits in recent years, challenges to data capture requirements will take time to communicate to these third-party organizations and to train them. SBA will utilize system controls as much as possible to obtain consistent quality data at points of entries to our automated systems, and we will strengthen data policies and standards when needed. SBA anticipates a significant increase in public inquiries and requests for information due to an incomplete understanding of the reporting complexities for SBA's loan guarantees and surety bond program. Further, announced audits from our Inspector General, as well as the support that we have to provide for yearly IT security reviews and audits without additional staff will place a burden on the limited staff we currently have and necessitate some additional resources. To help reduce costs, SBA plans to utilize the functionality of the Treasury-developed data broker to lessen the burden of merging and validating the agency's data. However, pre-submission validation and extensive testing of the data files to ensure proper reconciliation will be required by the agency. We will implement tools to incorporate requirements for Data Act as well as agency analysis reporting requirements, and will develop automated processes at available opportunities to reduce errors and the costs associated with human intervention. But despite all of these efforts and practices, additional resources will be needed. SBA plans to leverage the data extracted from the source systems to help management make better informed management decisions. This will involve acquiring some business intelligence and analytics tools. SBA will use the new reporting requirements as an opportunity to modernize our data standardization and data quality programs as well. SBA's ability to understand the benefits that can be realized through the implementation of the Data Act has been informed by our participation in Treasury's technology pilot. By being able to see the visualization created with our FY 2014 grants and contracts data, we have been able to identify 4 key benefits that we believe should be realized by agencies upon implementation. One is greater transparency, which can help us reduce fraud and mitigate risk. 2 is providing greater insights by helping us identify efficiencies and inefficiencies in the delivery of our programs. 3 is customized services by giving us greater flexibility to segment populations to customize our services to the public. And 4, to better enable data-driven decisions by providing data that facilitates faster, more accurate, performance-based decisions. In conclusion, on behalf of SBA, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today and share with you information on the significant progress we have made in implementing the requirements of the Data Act, and in particular, the work that we have accomplished with Treasury on devising a technology solution for the broker. And I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank all of the witnesses for their well-thought-out and well-prepared testimony. I'll recognize the gentleman from Michigan, the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, this has been a valuable subcommittee in looking at issues over the course of this term, doing what we're supposed to do here in the People's House, doing oversight over what goes on in very important agencies and support agencies that will assist us in knowing what's taking place. Yesterday, we had a hearing where one of the pieces of information that came out, and thanks for the panel for being here, revolved around a Washington Post article that came out earlier this week, illustrating why the Data Act is so important, as well as other evaluative tools that we put in place. When we found out that, sadly, it had to come from Bob Woodward, talking about the Department of Defense having a report that showed $125 billion of savings over 5 years simply by addressing administrative waste. What was challenging and frustrating is the fact that DOD has attempted to hide that and squash that information that they requested to be developed because it would impact their ability to spend if Congress got wind of it. Well, we did get wind of it. And when you see $125 billion of cost savings that could assist, I mean, that's at the level, reportedly, of operational costs for 50 Army brigades or 10 carrier groups. That starts to be real money, but more importantly, for our troops to get away from that waste. So, Ms. Riscana, let me ask, how might full implementation of the Data Act improve our ability to identify that kind of savings at DOD?
Well, the Data Act is not only going to provide more transparency to where the funds are being spent, but hopefully it's also going to provide a vehicle for DOD management and other agencies to manage their funds and manage their programs and make sure that as obligations are incurred, that they are deobligated in the proper time. Another benefit of the Data Act should be through oversight on the part of not only DOD management, but their auditors and also the Congress. And this should give more visibility to how DOD is spending their money. The third area, it would be through data analytics, where DOD can analyze the data and look for areas of fraud, risk, abuse, and potentially improper payments, and recover funds through that mechanism also.
What can you tell me about DOD's readiness relative to data?
We just received the IG's report from regarding DOD's readiness, and in their report, they indicate that DOD is going to be requesting an extension. They have the opportunity to use 3 extensions of 6 months each before reporting their data. It's our understanding that the letter has been drafted, but it has not been sent forward for signature yet. We also know that OMB and Treasury were informed of this in August, so they may have some more insight for you.
I guess I'd move over there because it would be a responsibility, Mr. Mader, as you know, to report any requests for extensions to Congress and this committee. Has a request been made yet?
We don't have a formal request yet. As my colleague from OMB testified, we understand that a letter has been drafted, but the Director has not received it yet.
Based upon that, does it appear that DOD will be ready to fully implement the DATA Act by the extended statutory deadline, which could be upwards of 6 months?
Congressman, I'm not in a position today to speculate as to whether they're going to be ready 6 months after August of 16. And I say that because of sort of wearing one of my other hats and overseeing all of the federal financial audits of all of the agencies. I'm intimately involved in the DOD efforts to move towards a clean opinion, and that's been going on, as you know, for a number of years now.
A long time.
A number of years. And not making excuses for my colleagues from DOD, but the complexity and scale of that organization, the number of separate financial management systems and management systems is a real challenge. And as I think my colleague from SBA testified, sort of linking up those management systems, the multiplicity in the case of DOD, management systems with financial systems, is a big lift.
Well, I appreciate that, and Mr. Chairman, with appreciation of that, but also now having evidence that has been leaked to us in an article about $125 billion of waste, and the fact that DOD has given clear indication by what they've said and what they've done with it that they want to cover that up. This is an important thing that we push, regardless of the complexity. We're talking about the lives of troops. We're talking about the security of this country. We're talking about remaining on top as a strong power. So let's keep pushing.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just say to my friend from Michigan, I associate myself with his remarks, and I am so pleased he brought it up. We can't ignore this. And it is the product, the byproduct of a siloed system at the Pentagon that exempts itself from everything. The Pentagon stands out. It's one of the few federal agencies that cannot produce a certified audit, what's called an unqualified audit. The biggest spender, the biggest procurer, the biggest employer in the federal government, and it can't abide by those rules. It exempts itself from the GSA schedule of purchasing, where we get discounts and we can try to get best price for off-the-shelf products. No, they've got their own. When we passed FTAR, we had a sort of a dance around the Pentagon, because if we had gone there, we would have had jurisdictional problems here, and they would have objected. And then, ironically, not you, Mr. Mader, but a previous person at OMB then, of course, objected to the bill because it didn't include DOD. I thought, well, we'd love to include DOD. They don't want to be included. And we don't want to keep up, the bill bottled up forever, on that. And now we've got $125 billion. I mean, that is the budget of some whole federal agencies. What we could do with that. And the gentleman from Michigan makes an excellent point, and frankly, at some point, if this committee could make a real contribution without designing to step on toes in, frankly, examining some of these issues a little bit more in depth in terms of processes that are not in place and rules and regulations that apply to other federal governments in terms of transparency and reporting that are not abided by because the Pentagon exempts itself. And it's so big, we sometimes, frankly, as a Congress, have turned a blind eye to it. And so I applaud my colleague from Michigan. I associate myself with his remarks, and I would hope in the next Congress this committee might try to make some contributions in trying to put systems in place that would prevent this kind of scandal from recurring. And I join him in that. Mr. Mader, the goal here with the DATA Act is to have harmonized reporting standards, full transparency, and so I can look across the federal family, 24 agencies, and see the same formatted data so that I can actually compare apples and apples as opposed to this hodgepodge we have right now. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Congressman.
And what would be your best estimate of when we can achieve that goal?
So if you remember, under the Data Act, we're adding new data elements, right? So we've been reporting spend, but we're going to have actually more spend. So we're going to have in excess of $3 billion as opposed to the little over $2 billion, because we're adding new, spend into the equation. The other significant, and it's a real benefit, is now we're going to report that spend for, let's say, a contract, right? And we're going to be able to point that contract back to what was the appropriation, what was the program activity, and what was the object class.
Right.
And that's the real power then of both within a department, but then horizontally saying who's using funds for this kind of activity.
I agree, and thank you. But I'm Citizen Q, and I want to see how my Federal Government is spending and accounting for spending. When will I be able to go online and any Federal agency, I'm going to see that harmonized set of standards so that I can actually follow the picture? When will the Data Act be fully online and implemented?
For the vast majority of the CFO Act agencies who represent in excess of 90% of the government-wide spend, we're going to be able to see that in May.
In May.
In May of this, in May of 17, right?
All right.
I mean,
Mr. Meadows and I are going to be ready, I think, with
no,
the
we
hearing.
appreciate that. We appreciate the healthy skepticism, but I know there's been a lot of concern about will this work, and I think my colleague from SBA, and we've been using them as our prototype, because while they may not be the biggest department, they actually have all of the elements, all of the complexity that a DHS has. So we said, let's use them as our proof of concept, and Mr. Gribben just testified. They actually dumped all their data into the broker, and they're generating reports. It works.
But SBA is not part of the pilot project for grants and contracts, right?
No, HHS, well, two separate things. So the pilot for Section 5 is to reduce burden, separate and distinct from the rest of the Data Act.
Right. But SBA gives a lot of grants and contracts.
Oh, yeah.
And it might be useful if they were part of the pilot project with respect to
Well, the pilot project, so HHS, as you know, is sort of our agent to execute that. And the reason we selected HHS is because they are the 800-pound gorilla with regard to grants. So, they work with the other, grant-making agencies. So Tim and other agencies know what HHS is doing. But again, I go back to my point is, if there was any concern on this committee's point as to whether the concept that we introduced back in 2014 about the broker and what Treasury was going to do and agile development, I'm here to say it works. He just testified to it. It works.
Yeah. And just final point, how cooperative is the Pentagon with what we're trying to do with the Data Act in light of what you just heard Mr. Walberg and myself say with respect to the $125 billion, I don't know, lost money?
I can't comment on that post story, but with regard
No, I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking about compliance and
they
cooperation.
They are cooperating. And actually what we're trying to do is leverage the work, Congressman, that we're doing on trying to get them to be audit ready to help them with the Data Act. And it's the same folks that are working on both of those initiatives. So Dave and I have met with them multiple times in person. They're not sitting back saying we're exempt. I mean, they are working on it.
Good. And just to clarify, and then so when you say by May of next year, full, hopefully 90% implementation and compliance, you're including the Pentagon?
They're going to, so the Pentagon.
That was a long pause, Mr. Mayor.
No, the Pentagon will continue to report. They're going to report their full appropriation, right? What they're going to be deficient in is actually making some of these quality assurance linkages between our financial system and the management system. Because remember, what we've been criticized, and rightfully so in the past by GAO, about the quality of the data that's coming in. Because if it came in from the procurement system, but it doesn't match with the financial system. You got to wonder which one is right. So the linkages between these two that both Courtney and Tim have testified to is critical. That's where DOD is running into significant challenges because of the multiplicity of their procurement systems and their financial systems.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, on October 8, 2016, Hurricane Matthew made landfall, bringing destructive winds and flooding to the southeast, including the 1st Congressional District of Georgia, which I have the honor and privilege of representing. The damage was widespread, but one community that was particularly hard hit was the Westlake Apartments in Savannah. Westlake Apartments is a privately owned 100-unit property that is part of a Section 8 Housing Assistance Payment contract with HUD. The property suffered severe water damage from the storm, and families were displaced and forced to turn into shelters. Although the responsibility lies with the private property owner to provide safe and clean housing for Section 8 tenants, it took almost 2 weeks, to contact the Westlake owner, relocate the displaced residents, and to begin inspections. In total, 22 units were found to be uninhabitable and unfit for HUD subsidies. It took several official letters from my office and numerous conference calls from HUD to finally hold the owners accountable, despite these owners being legally obligated through their contract with HUD. One of the mechanisms HUD uses to hold private property owners accountable is withholding subsidies. If a Section 8 owner does not provide clean, safe housing or fails to relocate residents, HUD is supposed to withhold subsidy payments. In this situation, it was never clear if the payments were withheld, when they were going to be withheld, or where the subsidy was going. Was this money going to be used to immediately move displaced residents out of the shelters and into temporary housing? My constituents, some of whom are still displaced, even today, December the 8th, some are still displaced. They deserve to know. They deserve to know, and they need to know. What happened at Westlake Apartments was completely unacceptable. And while I'm grateful to HUD for their work with us to correct the situation, we need to make sure something like this never happens again. The Data Act, if it's fully implemented, would provide much-needed clarity into how HUD spends its funding, and then withholding subsidy payments is an effective enough mechanism to hold owners accountable. Ms. Timberlake, is HUD fully committed to implementing the Data Act as required by law and providing more transparency into how these subsidies are spent in the Section 8 housing program?
Congressman Carter, thank you for the question. HUD is committed to complying with the Data Act. I understand that you and Secretary Castro have previously spoken about this issue.
On numerous occasions. In fact, I've invited Secretary Castro 4 times to visit this area. Haven't seen him yet, but I've invited him 4 times. He hadn't been down there. Look, you know who the face of the federal government is in the 1st Congressional District? You're looking at it right here. You know who had to face these residents and tell them about this? Right here. Now, that's fine. I'm a responsible person, and I can handle that. But I don't want to have to call the Secretary of HUD and invite him down 4 times, and he has no interest at all in coming down there and helping these people. These people were displaced. Have you ever been displaced out of your home? No. Have you ever had a flooded home? What happened? Tell me what happened. I need to go back, and I need to tell these people what happened. So you tell me what happened.
Congressman Carter, I understand that your staff has received updates on the progress that the owner has made.
We're not talking about the progress. I'm asking you what happened. Why did it take 2 weeks to contact the owner? Were the subsidies withheld?
Sir, my office is not involved in overseeing Section 8 multifamily housing properties. I do want to go back to a point you made earlier. The Data Act is focused on creating more transparency in financial reporting related to all of our projects. I'd be happy to take back your specific concerns to my colleagues.
How can I take them any higher than taking them to the Secretary himself? I spoke to him on 2 2 different occasions, invited him 4 different times to come down and see what was going on here. Hadn't seen him yet.
Congressman Carter, I would be happy to take back your
I hope you will. Thank you very much. Ms. Roscano, can you help me here? If we implement the Data Act, do you think that this will help in a situation like this?
I can't speak to this particular situation, but I do believe that the Data Act, once fully implemented, and you get those appropriate linkages between financial and performance data, will help program managers better monitor their programs, be more responsive to inquiries, and hopefully through data analytics, they'll be able to identify areas of risk, improper payments, and other areas that need management attention. So the sooner we can get the full act implemented, I think the better off we'll be from a management perspective.
And you think it'll help us in Congress to be able to actually see what's going on there?
I would hope so.
I would hope so too, because right now it ain't good. I'm just telling you. Look, folks, I'm a responsible person, and I'm perfectly willing to meet with these people. I'm perfectly willing to accept my responsibility. But this was just, I'm sorry, this was just poor performance on behalf of HUD. This should have never happened. Can you imagine having to take your family being displaced?
Gentleman's time.
I yield.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee is a result of a committee hearing we had last week where we tried to get answers to certain questions. GAO was here and said they couldn't give us the answers to many of the questions we had because Treasury and OMB weren't able to provide them the information that seemed to us to be information that should be readily available. We know that that was accurate because it took Treasury until just this week to give us information that the committee had been asking for over a year. So let's see if we can get some answers, Mr. Chairman, to just some basic questions. My understanding is there's 3 broad categories. So we got the fee category that the various agencies in the federal government collect fees. We got fines and penalties that the various agencies across the federal government collect. And then we also have settlements. Largely that's Department of Justice issue, but could be other agencies, I suspect, as well. So, Mr. Mader, can you tell me the overall amount that the federal government collects in those 3 categories, fees, fines and penalties, and settlements, annually?
Congressman Jordan, I don't have that data today. I'm not sure what that number is.
Mr. Liebert, can you tell us?
I can tell you the Bureau of the Fiscal Service reports for the government as a whole. So we do government-wide reporting. And the figure that we place in a combined statement of the Treasury, that number of total fines, penalties, and forfeitures is $14,134,326.11.
Say it again, 14 billion?
$14,134,000,000.
No, you don't give us all that, 14 billion. I got it.
Okay.
What about fees?
That is included in that total figure, and that is for fiscal year 15.
Only 14 billion?
That we have reported in the combined statement in fiscal year
OMB
15.
issues a document that says fees alone are 534 billion. Why the discrepancy?
I don't know where that number comes
You're saying all 3 categories, fees, fines, penalties, and settlements, those 3 broad categories, it's a total of $14 billion?
and fines, fees, and forfeitures.
Fine, fees, and forfeitures.
Settlement number, I don't have that figure in front of me.
Where is the 534 billion number come from, Mr. Mader, that is in the OMB document for fees?
I'm not sure what document, Congressman, you're referring to.
Can we have that? I think it's the presidential budget, if I remember. Yeah. Presidential budget list for 2017, $534 billion.
Then the number is right if it's in the President's budget, sir.
Okay, so OMB says it's $534 billion just in fees, and Treasury says it's $14 billion in fees, fines, penalties, and settlements. Who's right?
So I think the larger number you're referring to is offsetting receipts federal government takes money in two major buckets. One is normal receipts in terms of tax collections and like. The bucket you're talking about, which has the 500 and some billion in it, is things like sales of postage stamps, park fees, and a number of other things like that. So the number I gave you is a much more defined, narrow number. The larger number you have there is a broader, more expansive number.
Well, the number I gave you is fees, right? You even said fees in your definition when you were talking about offsetting receipts. You said fees. You used that when you described it. That's what I asked, fees.
One sub-element of the number that you have is fees, yes.
Okay. Has Treasury taken what's your thoughts on Congressman Palmer's legislation that would say these three categories, instead of the agencies being able to spend, these come back to Treasury and are subject to the appropriations process and congressional oversight and control?
Mr. Congressman, the administration doesn't have an opinion on that legislation.
Not at all? What about Treasury?
The administration, we speak for
Administration?
Treasury.
Okay, got it. Can you tell me,
They're still part of the administration.
I understand,
last I checked.
but I was just going to see if he would offer a different response. Can you tell me what Department of Justice, the Department of Justice in settlements occurred in 2017, or excuse me, 2016?
Sir, I don't have that number in front of me.
You don't have that number, Mr.
I don't
Mader?
have that number, no, sir.
That's a pretty important number because a lot of us feel like that's not just settlements, that's a shakedown operation that's going on over there. We'd like to have that. All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, for Mr. Mader. Is that right, Mader?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There's a famous restaurant in Milwaukee.
I know. Unfortunately, we don't own it.
Okay. Good. I hope you've been there, or was there. With regard to the Data Act, could you just give me in general your opinion as to how much progress OMB and Treasury are making in determining which agencies are required to report under the Act?
So I think back in the April hearing, we had a conversation about that, and we committed after the hearing to go back and look at all of the agencies that could potentially be required under the statute to adhere to the Data Act. And I want to sort of set the stage, though. The fact is, we've been concentrating on the 24 CFO Act agencies because they represent, 90+% of the total government spend. They're the ones that are going to spend $3+ billion that will be reported in next May. Subsequent to the hearing in April, we went back and started looking at all of those other mid-sized agencies, smaller agencies, independent boards and commissions. We went out and asked that group whether, based on their reading, their general counsel's reading of the Data Act, whether they would be required to adhere to the Data Act. So we have now 83 agencies, which includes the 24 CFO Act agencies, that have said, yes, we are covered by it. There are a number of those other agencies that came back and said, we're not covered by it. We're going back to have conversation with them, and then we're looking at all of the others over the next couple of months to see, should they be adhering to it. And I think, Congressman, the reason we took that approach is, and I think everybody has recognized, we've been doing this with limited additional funding, and we've redirected resources across departments to accomplish this. We really focused on those that are contributing, the 90+% of the dollars. We will get to everybody else over time.
So isn't it really settled yet which of these other agencies are part of it? Do they know they're part of it? Could you say, if I ask you right now, these agencies are part of it and these aren't, you could give me a hard list?
We can give you the list of the 83 that have said, yep, we're part of it. Like, you have like FDIC, which is going to be reporting under the Data Act. So we can provide the committee with a list of, the ones that have said, yes, we have read the statute, and yes, we are obligated to report.
Okay. So is it right now settled that we know which agencies are supposed to report and which are not? Is
No,
that-
it's still not settled. As I just said, you know, we've gotten responses back from some saying they're not required. We're going to go back and look at their rationale, and there's some others that we've asked and have, quite candidly, haven't gotten a response from, and we're going to follow up with them. But some of these, you need to understand, some of the ones that we're talking about are very, very small boards and commissions. You know, I don't want to speculate how much their spend is, but it's not a lot. But we're going to get to them. It's just a matter of setting management priorities, and that's what we did.
You can tell me again, when did the act first pass?
May of well, it was signed by the President in May of 2014.
I think it's odd that we're over 2.5 years in and we haven't decided what agencies are part of it yet. But if that's what it is, that's what it is.
Well, I think when you have more than 90% of the spend, that's a significant accomplishment.
Well, if you would have asked me at the time the act passed, I mean, I wasn't here, but I would have thought that would take about a week, but what do I know? Okay, Mr. Liebrick. Well, is that right, Liebrick? Under the GAO's report that a newly convened Data Standards Committee drafted a charter that delineates the role, we understand that GAO's report, we understand from the GAO's report that the newly convened Data Standards Committee has drafted a charter that delineates its roles and responsibilities. What is the status of that charter?
The OMB has stood the committee up. It has met on numerous occasions already. The first meeting was in September. Dave and I met with the committee, I want to say maybe a month ago, several weeks ago. We've charged them with making sure they put together a work plan about what they're going to be looking for in the next 6 months. They're scheduled to come back to us shortly with that work plan and consistent with the charter.
Has it been approved by the Executive Steering Committee?
Yeah. The gentleman's time has expired, but if you'd go ahead and answer.
The committee reports to the Executive Steering Committee, which consists of Dave and me. And yes, we have agreed. And OMB is the lead on the committee, but they do report to us on a regular basis.
Okay. The chair recognizes, I thank the gentleman, the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. They have called votes, and so I want to be sensitive to you and your staff. And so instead of coming back and recessing, I'm going to yield some time to the gentleman from Ohio, and then I will give some written questions, and that way we can adjourn so that you don't have to wait for me to come back. But the gentleman from Ohio, I'll yield to him.
I think the Chairman, reading from the President's budget for 2017, offsetting collections, offsetting receipts from the public are estimated to be $534 billion. So I'm still having trouble figuring out why Treasury says it's $14 billion when we have $534 billion here in fees from the OMB. Why that huge gap?
So we can bring you a definition of what the offsetting receipts is to give you a fuller feel for what all the different components are that go into that number.
But even this, of these, an estimated $231.8 billion are offsetting collections. So that's a lot more than $14 billion just there.
Yeah, and offsetting collections, when you look at the definition of offsetting receipt, you can see things like sale of federal property,
All I'm saying is these are things outside of the jurisdiction of normal appropriations by the United States Congress, the people's representatives, right?
No, sir. When the government, as the Constitution says, we can only spend money with the authority of Congress. So anything that we're doing is with the authorization of Congress.
Yeah, but not in the normal appropriations process.
Congress would have given the authority to each entity to take those funds and use them in a number of ways. Now, I should mention to you that most of these funds that you're looking at have those receipts are returned to the general fund, and they are not dedicated to those programs. In certain circumstances, the funds are dedicated to those programs.
Understand.
As Congress has given that authority to those programs.
Okay.
Called a permanent authority.
Let me ask one other question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. The settlement issue, settlements at Department of Justice, do you know if that number has been increasing or decreasing?
I don't know, but what I do know from my experience is it varies because, For example, during the savings, during various issues during the history of our country, economic issues, sometimes there's more settlements than other settlements.
Fair enough. That 14 billion number you gave us, and that combines all these three broad categories, has that number been trending up or down?
Unfortunately, sir, I did not look at the trend before I showed up this morning.
Thank you. We need to know that. Thanks.
Okay.
So, Mr. Lieberich, let me offer you an out, because I don't want you to give false testimony, and I know you're trying to answer and be prepared for us, but just looking at your own reports, there's about $9 billion that you collect just within the IRS alone. So your $14 billion has to be understated, and it just, I'm a numbers guy and I look at everything, so here's what I would ask you to do. Is go back, let's look at that. The gentleman's point is well taken. It's not $14 billion, and I understand that you were trying to be prepared for this committee, and I want to applaud you for doing that. But let's look at that differently. There's just zero chance that that's an accurate number, okay? Just based on your own data.
Yeah. I agree, sir. What I was referring to is what is reported through something we call a Treasury account symbol that is very specific, and you're right.
What the gentleman's trying to get at is that we have from OMB between $500 and $650 billion that come in fees, settlements, fines, et cetera. Some, as you mentioned, are, quote, appropriated only because we say that they're appropriated, but it doesn't go through the normal appropriations process. We need some accurate numbers from both of you if we can do that. We are going to votes. Here's what I would ask OMB if you would do. I need your contacts, since this is your last rodeo. I need your contacts on implementing all of this throughout all of the agencies, who we need to go through in terms of making sure that we don't lose any progress on this throughout all the agencies. And then from GAO's standpoint, I need you to work with OMB in these last few days on the governance aspect of that, the hurdles that we have. You've already identified those. If you could report back. If there's no further business before this committee, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you all.